In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains how your reward system works.
Part of the reason that you can tolerate being alive is because when you're progressing towards goals that you regard as valid and when you're making progress, the dopaminergic system kicks in. It's an approach system. It kicks in. It makes you feel good. So there's a positive emotional element to that, which is sort of like, it's okay to engage with the world. That's sort of the message of that. It also facilitates certain kinds of learning because it basically says, since what you're doing right now is working, it's okay if you learn how to do it better. So it reinforces it, right? That's part of the reinforcement structure. And then it also suppresses anxiety and pain. So for example, I don't know if you know this or not, but cocaine is a pretty good analgesic. And if you mix cocaine with opiates, which is something to think about if you're ever dying of intractable cancer and you're in terrible pain. If you mix stimulants with opiates, you get a better pain medication than either one of them alone. Plus you stay alert, which is also a useful thing to know. So Ritalin and opiates works as well. So it's important to know that if you ever know someone who's in severe, intractable, and final pain, because it can be managed, although doctors are loath to mix those things, but whatever. Okay, so when does the dopaminergic system manifest itself? Well, under two conditions. One is when you're moving towards a valued goal and the signs are that you're actually succeeding in your movement towards it. And part of that is because the dopaminergic system responds to cues of consummatory reward. And consummatory reward is any reward that brings the perceptual system, we'll call it the subpersonality, to a halt. So for example, if you're hungry, then as long as you're hungry and in that frame of mind, then anything associated with food is going to be reinforcing in a dopaminergically mediated way. Technically that's incentive reward. But as soon as you eat, well then that frame of reference is no longer relevant, it disappears, and then food isn't reinforcing. Even though it's interesting, eh? Because you might think that one of the ways that you could stop eating when you'd had enough is that food would stop tasting. But it doesn't, right? It's kind of weird. The food still tastes the same, roughly speaking, but it's no longer enjoyable. And the reason for that actually is that the taste system has two elements that are separated physiologically. One of them is responsible for taste, and it's also responsible for sort of making you want to crave different foods during an eating episode. So there's actually a separate one for sweets, for example, and so you can satiate the others and not satiate the sweet receptors, and then you want some dessert. So and if you keep rewarding that system with dessert, then it's going to get more and more powerful. But there's another system that sits on top of that acts independently, and its job is to say how good each of those tastes now are. And so as you get satiated, what happens is that system just shuts down. It stops associating the taste with reward. So, you know, it's kind of a cool way of setting it up, I think. You can still taste things, which you need to do because you're an omnivore, and if you couldn't taste things, well, then you'd die because you'd put something stupid in your mouth, and that'd be the end of you. So you can maintain the taste, but the reward varies. So the dopaminergic system responds to incentive reward, which is cues that a consummatory reward are forthcoming from a behavioral perspective. And the consummatory reward stops the action of the cycle, and then another system that needs a consummatory reward pops up. So in some sense what's happening is that you're continually subject to the emergence of new motivated subpersonalities or frames of reference, and you're just cycling through those things all the time. And then you might say, well, what happens if you are in some favorable state and you've just satiated everything? And the answer to that is, you'll find the environment itself mildly curiosity-inspiring. The dopaminergic system will make exploring novelty rewarding, and so you'll go out and you'll do some random exploration because what the hell, you might as well do something while you're awake, and that will increase your realm of competence and the size of your explored territory. And that's a very fundamental, it's not a drive, it's a very fundamental subpersonality. And the reason I'm telling you that it's nested in the hypothalamus is because I don't want you to be thinking that this is some new thing. It's really, really old. It's probably about as old as pain. And it's older, I think, than anxiety. Because anxiety seems to be manifested mostly as a consequence of higher order cognitive and emotional systems that evolved after the hypothalamus evolved, roughly speaking. So, okay. So, when you're on your way somewhere, good things or bad things can happen. If good things happen, you get a dopamine kick, and that keeps you focused on your goal, and it validates your theory, and you get to move to where you're going, and you get a consummatory reward, and good for you. That's success. Except then a new frame of reference pops up, and you have the same problem. That's Sisyphus, right? You're always pushing the damn rock up the hill. It's always rolling back down. The question is, do you find any delight in pushing the rock up the hill? So the other thing that can happen is something you don't want to have happen, and that thing indicates that you're not getting to where you're going. Now, the question is, what should you do when you find out that you're not getting where you want to go? And the answer to that is, you don't actually know. You actually don't know. And this is where things get complicated, because on the one hand, you could say, you could run into a known obstacle. You remember Rumsfeld? There are known unknowns and unknown unknowns? No, you're probably too young for that. Anyways, if I'm walking towards the door and I encounter this table, then that's going to frustrate and annoy me. But it's only going to do it to a limited degree, because I can make a very trivial correction in trajectory and I can get to the door. And so I would say, well, that's just an obstacle. It's an obstacle. I know its features. I have a prearranged schema of conception and action so that I can render it irrelevant with very little effort. Okay, so it's a known obstacle. But then, and that's fine. So those are just negative things, and you try to get them out of your way. So for example, that's partly why you clean up your house, right? Because you want your house to be in order so that if you're doing things in there, things don't get in your way and annoy you. It just makes it more efficient. So basically what you're doing is trying to ensure that the paths you take to desired ends are clear. That's what it means to have a place in order.